Well, good evening. I am so delighted to be here and to worship with you and to worship with my friends from United Voice Worship. We have been doing things together for years, and I love worshiping with them in this space because I love worshiping in this room. I mean, isn't it an aesthetic masterpiece? And when I think of all the beautiful, picturesque, sacred halls of worship, I think of the gym at Pepperdine. I mean, you can call it a field house, but it's a gym. My father-in-law once worshiped at St. Peter's Basilica, and he talked about how beautiful the arches and the architecture were. It's this space that's created to make you feel appropriately small as you worship. And my family, my wife and our two daughters, every Christmas Eve after our services at our church, we gather around our television to watch the Pope from St. Peter's Basilica. And because my daughters went and are going to private Catholic school, they explained to me the liturgy and everything that's going on. When I'm like, I have just done 7 services, I am falling asleep. It's beautiful. And my wife grew up in Arizona, and she talks about the beauty of Chapel of the Holy Cross in Sedona, with this incredible cross sticking out of the red rocks. And there you can see all of this beauty of creation as far as the eye could see. And last weekend, I was in Eureka Springs, Arkansas at Thorn Crown Chapel. I was officiating a wedding. There's a couple from our church. She's a model. He's a photographer. They are both great, but she is much better looking. And they wanted a beautiful space to share this sacred moment together. And Thorn Crown Chapel is tucked into the mountains in the woods. It's all glass. You can hear the stream running near it. It is a beautiful place. Everything there whispers holiness. But when I think of sacred space, I think of this room with orange folding chairs, backless bleachers, Pepperdine Waves scoreboard in the back. Nothing says worship like the faint smell of Axe body spray and a little bit of threat of catching athlete's foot. It's just like the temples of old. But I do love this room. Next month, I turn 50 years old. And this is when you say, Sean, you look far too young and good looking to be 50. I know. I am as shocked as anybody. But I remember the first time I came into this room. I was 26 years old, and at the time, I was the youth minister at the Bering Drive Church of Christ in Houston, Texas, and I had wanted to come to the Pepperdine Bible Lectures for a very, very long time, and I'd never been able to make it happen, and finally, I was able to, and we were going to come that year, and one of my elders, a man named Edward Fudge, and his wife, Sarah Faye, who came here and taught for a long time, for years and years, pulled me aside, and Sarah Faye said to me, Sean, it's so incredible. You're in a room with everyone that you've ever wanted to be in a room with. And it was true. I flew out here with my friend Chad Higgins, and we stayed in towers, apartments, and we had never been on campus before. And we were up there standing in line, waiting for the shuttle. And in those days, the line took a very long time to get on the shuttle. And we had already spent over an hour just looking for a parking spot. And then we spent 45 minutes checking into our dorm, and then waiting for that shuttle to come. We just got tired of waiting. And we were young and spry, and we decided that we would walk from that room down to this room. We did that once. Just once. And we sat in the back right over there. And I think the theme that year was Romans. And Chad had spent the last 6 months reading and studying and memorizing Romans. I had done nothing. And we sat there with all the people that we had ever wanted to be in a room with. And I remember the preachers, some who were heroes to me and have become friends, people like Mike Cope and Rick Ashley and others who came here and stood on the stage and preached. And back in those days, people would arrive early for Songfest to get a seat, and the bleachers were pulled down, and there would be loud singing, and then there would be a murmur in the back where all of the booths are. And sometimes that murmur would get too loud and even overcome the singing. And then someone would shush all the people who were doing all the murmuring, which only made that louder. And at some point, around 7, Jerry Rushford would come in and stand right here, and he would say, "We need everybody to move down the bleachers, squeeze in to find a seat for people who are just arriving." And I thought, how is that my problem? I got here on time. I didn't tell these people to be late. Glorious room. And after that first year, when I was 26 years old, I came back again. And then I came back with my pregnant wife other year. And then after that, our oldest daughter. And then our second daughter. We still have programs in our house from when my oldest daughter was in first grade in the Making Waves program for kids. That first grader just finished her sophomore year at the University of Texas in Austin this afternoon. I hope that was for me because I'm paying for it. And some of you have similar stories. Some of you have memories very much like mine, but you also have eyes. You can see what I see. The line for the shuttle is not that long anymore. And you can park just about anywhere you want to. There's no need to get here early to save a seat. No one's asked you to squeeze in. The room hasn't changed. But that's just about all that hasn't changed. Maybe you're like me, and the same things that are happening here are happening to your church back home. There are plenty of empty seats. Before COVID, our church had a space problem. We would have to get up at some point in every gathering over the weekend and tell people to squeeze in, to make rooms. There were people lined up on the wall across the back and other people sitting crisscross style in the aisles. We were blowing and going and had 5 gatherings across all of our campuses. Before, we had a staff of about 50 people, and now we have a staff of about 30. And on the weekends, there are plenty of seats. Am I alone? Do you have empty seats? And it's not like we're saving one for Elijah. They're just empty. In the last few years, I've had more meetings about staff cuts and budget cuts. We've had to decide which building repairs to make and which building repairs can wait. And that's pretty much where the American church is. Churches are scrambling to find something, anything that works. One church in the town where I live has decided to just go all in on one side of the political spectrum. Because maybe that'll work. Their preacher preached a sermon series called The Church Alive, The Church Awake, Not Woke. He's called immigrants, trash, and garbage. And why? Because that's a message that puts bottoms in those empty seats. And there's another church down the street that every holiday they turn their entire campus into a poor man's Disney World, complete with princesses and rides and hula hoops in the hopes of putting butts in seats. And there's another church whose diet of teaching is pretty much the Democratic Party platform because they want a different set of butts in a different set of seats. And I don't know how deeply committed any of them are to anything that they're saying or doing, but I do know the anxiety that creates the actions. I know in our fellowship, this fellowship that raised me and trained me, and our basic insecurity, that, oh, those Church of Christ people, they don't know how to grow churches. They don't know anything about leading churches. So let's reach into the community church grab bag for something that works, that'll fill the seats. Let's sprinkle in some church growth pragmatics from this group, work in some racist homogeneous unit principle from that group. Let's have a preacher wear skinny jeans and sit by a pub table. Let's go hardline, let's go liberal, looking everywhere we can find for a quick fix, a shot of adrenaline, a salve for our ego, and a business model that looks like it's working. It's a Frankenstein's monster of incoherent theology, but maybe it'll work. And I know the anxiety. Because I've done things, and I've preached things, sermons, because I knew there was a market for it. And feeling empowered feels so much better than feeling marginalized. Because I'm an American, and I've got a good-sized home, and my wife drives a luxury car, and my daughter goes to private school. It's a good life. And what would make it even better is if I lived in a world where my faith were celebrated and loved and rewarded and had political power. So faith has become a means, a lever that we pull to get what we really want: comfort. And when comfort taps out, maybe we can find a faith that works for us rather than a faith that works in us. I get it. I feel it. And then I run headlong into Hebrews. The book of Hebrews, as you have heard all week, is about a people who are increasingly tempted to look at Jesus and look at the world and trade faith in Jesus for something that looks like it will work. A faith with more flag salutes and a little less faithful suffering. And just when I feel all tempted to abandon Jesus for some cloned ChatGPT, cable news ready, bloodless version of faith, when I want to settle for a faith devoid of suffering, the writer of Hebrews sits me down in one of my empty pews and says, recall those earlier days when, after you had been enlightened, you endured a hard struggle with sufferings, sometimes being publicly exposed to insults and afflictions, and sometimes becoming partners with those so treated. For you had compassion for those who were in prison, and you cheerfully accepted the plundering of your possessions, knowing that you yourselves possess something better and more lasting. Do not, therefore, abandon that boldness of yours. It brings a great reward, for you need endurance so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what was promised. For yet in a very little while, the one who is coming will come and will not delay. But my righteous one will live by faith. My soul takes no pleasure in anyone who shrinks back, but we are not among those who shrink back, and so are lost, but among those who have faith and preserve our souls. We are not the ones who shrink back. Hey, doesn't that sound good? But I've heard a lot of sermons in my life about not shrinking back. And we like the idea of not shrinking back when not shrinking back means going on the offense, when it means taking the fight to them, when not shrinking back means harnessing up a whole bunch of keyboard courage and going on Facebook and Twitter, or when not shrinking back means demanding that everyone who is not like you live like you and calling that conviction. But that's not what Hebrews calls not shrinking back. Hebrews says that not shrinking back is perseverance. It's endurance. And perseverance and endurance sound awful. No one has to persevere the greatest vacation of their life. No one says, that dessert was so delicious, but I endured. We only need to persevere. We only need endurance when we know we are suffering. When it looks like faith is failing. There is a philosopher I like named Robert Roberts. Robert Roberts, whose parents had no creativity. And Roberts writes about perseverance. And he says that perseverance isn't courage. Courage is the ability to look at a difficult situation, look it straight in the eye, and do it anyway. And he also says that perseverance isn't patience. Patience is a long suffering over grace with time. Robert says there are three characteristics to perseverance. Perseverance takes one foresight. We have to be able to imagine a future that's not currently happening now, which is why your children drive you crazy, because kids have no foresight. I was at the Highland Park Christian Church this last Sunday, and it was family worship Sunday, and there was a kid complaining to his mom, this is terrible, I don't want to be in here, I want to go to kids' church. And I wanted to turn around and say, like, we haven't even started yet. Kids have no foresight. A moral passion is also part of perseverance. You and I have to become the kinds of people who see the good in becoming the kind of people who honor our commitments. And perseverance also takes a strength of will. And that means you don't live by the moment. And one of the aspects of our species is that we all have a will, but when our being is threatened, we are all willing to compromise that will. And Robert says you cannot be a person of perseverance and the kind of person who abandons their will. Perseverance, the Hebrew writer says, gives rise to a faith that does not shrink back. So often, the very things that we think make us people of conviction are the actual things that make us people who lack perseverance, who lack endurance. We become people who will do whatever and say whatever, whenever, to whomever, simply to end our own suffering or our own perception of suffering. Maybe the reason perseverance is so hard is because there are so many alternatives to faith on the Christian landscape, calling themselves faith, that don't require endurance. Nationalism is an alternative to faith. It doesn't require endurance. It requires power, and violence, and force. Economics are an alternative to faith. It doesn't require endurance. It requires connections and an underprivileged workforce and the randomness of whatever a particular society values as valuable at that time. Culture wars are an alternative to faith, but they don't require endurance. They require memes, dehumanization, and to bother to learn anything new, but it doesn't require endurance. It becomes very easy to desire a life that's comfortable for you and call it faith, because perseverance and endurance are only needed when you're suffering. And Hebrews says that the key to endurance isn't what you think it is. The key to endurance is to recall the days of old. Ara Norenzayan is a psychologist at the University of British Columbia, and he wrote a book called Big Gods: How Religion Transformed Cooperation and Conflict. And in it, he talks about 3 experiments they ran on students. In the first, researchers constructed a test to see if anonymity made any difference in human behavior. So they randomly assigned a group of students to wear clear glasses and a group of students to wear dark sunglasses. And they were told that they were testing a new product line. They were also, in an unrelated task, given $6 and a chance to share with any stranger that $6. And those wearing clear glasses, on average, gave $2.71. And those wearing dark sunglasses, on an average, gave $1.81. The mere fact of wearing sunglasses and thus feeling unrecognizable and unrecognized reduced generosity. In another experiment, they played the dictator game, in which students were given $10 and the opportunity to share it with anyone, any stranger. And beforehand, without realizing it, some of the students were shown on a computer screen a set of eyes, and another group of students were just shown a different picture. The ones who were shown a set of eyes before they went out in the world with their $10 gave 55 cents more on average to strangers than the others. And in the third study, they put a coffee pot in the hallway and encouraged people to take coffee and pay for it. But one week, they put up a set of watchful eyes, a painting of watchful eyes above the coffee pot. And the next week, they put up a painting of flowers above the coffee pot. In the weeks that they were showing eyes, people left on average 2.7 times as much money as others. And Norenzayan says this. He says that watched people are nice people. But looking at the results of the study, Rabbi Joseph Sachs says this. He says, this is part of what makes religion a force for honest and altruistic behavior. The belief that God sees what we do. Less obvious is the experimental finding that what makes the difference to the way we behave is not simply what we believe, but rather the fact of being reminded of it. And here's a little quirk about human beings. We are better people when we are reminded to be better people. So the Hebrew writer says, recall the days of old. Hebrews is saying, I know you want to go spiritual grab bagging. I know you want success. I know you want packed pews and the corner office and to be chairman of the board and have a seat in the cabinet. But we are people of perseverance, not presidencies nor power trips. And here's what that looks like. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Indeed, by faith, our ancestors received approval. By faith, we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen was made from things that are not visible. Our fundamental problem, as Mike said yesterday, is that we think seeing is believing, but everything you see is made from stuff that you don't see. And when you think seeing is believing, faith becomes a house that you visit and not a home that you live in. It's an Airbnb faith. It's only there to look nice and offer amenities while you're in town to accomplish something else. Faith is the conviction of things not seen. So when you're looking around despondent about what you do see, you are walking in the opposite direction of faith. Faith is the conviction that God is doing something that you cannot see and always has been. And what makes a difference is not what you believe. What makes a difference is being reminded of what you believe. So Hebrews launches us into a list to remind us of all of the people that we know already who have endured. Hebrews tells us of what faith is, and then Hebrews says, can I get a witness? And he's got some. Because Abel's going to come forth, and he got a testimony. And Noah's got a word for the church. And Abraham's got a witness. And Sarah got a list of something to tell you. And Rahab's got a praise report. And Moses got an amen from the back pew, one after another, so that you can be reminded that you can endure. Hebrews 11 is a whole list of folks who didn't give up and didn't give in when they were sitting in your chair, so that you know you can endure. And whatever you were feeling when you walked in here tonight, there is a litany and a history of women and men who have felt the way you feel and through faith have endured. You are not alone. Then in chapter 12, the writer says this: therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. And right here, wouldn't you want the Bible to offer you some practical steps? Wouldn't you want to know? How did Jesus endure? Wouldn't you want a 3-point outline or a system, a 5-year plan, a strategy? We want Hebrews to tell us how all of these people endured. What are the ingredients? Isn't there a manual for this? But it doesn't do that. Instead of a 3-point plan, Hebrew gives us something else: a cloud. We are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. Now, for a long time, when I read that the faithful were called up into a great cloud of witnesses, I got all warm and fuzzy inside. It was like Charmin. It was so soft. But just last month, I was a chaperone on my 17-year-old daughter's chorus trip to Chicago. And if you ever have a chance to chaperone chorus kids on a trip, don't. Our flight left Houston at 6:30 in the morning. When you're dealing with that many kids and parents and all those moving parts, that means you have to be at the airport at 4:30 in the morning just to get everybody checked in. And the only saving grace of that first morning was that the first thing we were going to do when we got to Chicago was go up into the Willis Tower. The Willis Tower is the 12th tallest building in the world. It's 106 floors. 112 floors, and on the 106th floor, there is a viewing window where you can stand, and on a clear day, you can see 4 states. I was excited to go up, the kids were excited to go up, but the day we got there was not a clear day. It was 36 degrees, freezing cold, rainy, foggy. And we went to Willis Tower and went up, and we could not see anything. And I don't mean that we couldn't see all 4 states. I mean, we could not see anything. And why? Because we were in the cloud. We went up 106 floors to see something, and when we got there, all we could see in the cloud was the cloud. When Hebrews says that we are in a great cloud of witnesses, it's not trying to make us feel cozy. It's reminding us that there have been people here before in the situation we find ourselves in now, and they couldn't see either. And through faith, they endured. Because the cloud is all you need. Because when the Jews heard the word cloud, they would have thought about the presence of God or meeting God. Because God was the cloud in the wilderness. God was the cloud above the mercy seat. God was the cloud that filled the temple. When you are in the cloud, all you can see is the cloud. And that's all you need to see. And this is a word that I have so desperately needed this last year. Because in July, my big brother died. He was 53. He had a heart episode. He was probably in the best shape that he had been in the last 20 years. And every day since that day, something in me has wondered whether anything that I do or anything that you do makes any difference at all, because in the end, we're all just gonna die. My daughters say that I'm in my Ecclesiastes era. And every day, somebody somewhere needs to remind me to endure. The day that my mom died, an hour after I got off the phone with her and she told me, I was on the phone with Don McLaughlin, who you heard Tuesday night. My mom worked for Don for nearly a decade, and he was telling me how their church was taking care of my mom. But they had bought her a plane ticket. She was leaving that day to go see my sister-in-law. They had sent someone to her house to help her pack and get ready and drive her to the airport. I talked to my friend Jeff Brooks, whose older brother had died just a few years ahead of that, and he told me, he says, you know, I pick up the phone once a week to call my brother, and you will too, and I do. I was headed here in a couple of days when that happened to meet with friends like Nick Dunbar and Eric Wilson, Freddie Lork in the back, and they text me every day to let me know that they were praying for me. And my friend Pat Bills and Jonathan Stormont, Jordan Hubbard called every day. And my friend John Allen Turner said, it just sucks. In the moments when life felt dark and gray and gloomy, and I didn't feel like faith was of much use, I had a cloud. And they did not tell me about brighter days. They told me about the days that they couldn't see either. They reminded me to hold on to who has been holding on to me. When our youngest daughter, Kate, was a baby, my wife tore her Achilles. And I was a youth minister at the time, and we had an older daughter, who was 3, and a newborn baby, and it was the summertime, so I was just having to take the girls with me on all the youth trips. But I didn't want to go on all the youth trips. I already didn't want to go, but that gave me a great excuse not to. But I needed to take our junior high kids to camp in Abilene from Houston, and so I loaded up both girls with the rest of our youth group, and I stopped on the way about halfway through in the town of Salado, where my mother-in-law lives, and left the baby with my mother-in-law. And Malia, our oldest, was going to drive with me the rest of the way to Abilene. I was going to drop off our junior high kids, spend the night, and then head back to Houston the next day to take care of Rochelle. And Malia was very excited because all she wanted to do when we got to Abilene was swim in the hotel pool. And if you're a parent of young kids, save your Disney money, because all they really want to do is swim in the hotel pool. And so we dropped off the kids and went to the hotel and checked in and changed, and she was just 3 years old and couldn't swim yet. So we put the big floaties on her arm, and we got into the pool, and we had the place completely to ourselves. No one else was there. And she started splashing around and having fun. And so I did that thing. Parents, you know this thing where you kind of like let go of them because you're just tired of being in the pool and you just want to see what they're going to do on their own. And I let go of her, but not too much, not too far away. And she just kept swimming and splashing around until she realized that she couldn't feel my hands on her anymore. And that's when her anxiety spiked. And she started screaming and shouting and splashing around. And so I put my hands back around her waist, and she wrapped her arms around my neck and said, "Daddy, you saved me." And I love being the hero, so I just let her believe it. But in my heart, I said, "Oh, girl, you were so scared about what was going to happen. But I had you the whole time." Church, faith is the assurance of what we cannot see. You may not feel God, you may not see God, but all that means is that you and I are together in this room, in the clouds.